What's going on, everybody? Ab the Audicrat here, and we're back today with another beat breakdown. This is episode number 2. For this beat, I sampled the Waterslide World theme, which is an old waterslide park based out of Lake George, New York. It was a little hard to chop. I did try to chop this up a few years ago, but to no avail. I tried again recently and came up with this. It's a very short beat, intentionally, like the jingle, but my take on it, and I put it out. This is going to be the breakdown for it. Hope you enjoy. Any questions or comments, leave them down below. If this video brings you any type of value, please consider liking and subscribing. I will be making plenty more of these. Let's get right into it. So to start it off, I'm just going to play the sample start to finish. It's not that long. Bear with me just to get an idea of what I chopped.
Waterslide world, I'm really crazy about your wild slide.
Wild, you bet.
Waterslide world, the #1 in family fun.
Fun, you bet.
I'm on a baby gonna slide, slide, slide. Come on, a baby gonna glide, glide, glide. Come on, a baby gonna slide, slide, slide. Away, gonna glide down, fly, whirl around, touch the sky. Waterslide world, I really love the way you feel.
So that was the sample. Pretty cool. The quality is not that great. I got it from the commercial off of YouTube. I tried really hard to find the best quality of that I can find, but it was just not out there, so I had to work with what I had. All right, let's go to the sequencer quick. And what I want to do this time is just kind of go top to bottom, drums, sample, bass. And I'll go over each of those. I'll play them in solo. I'll show you how I mixed them. Then I'll go over the mix bus, hit up the mixer a little bit, and call it a day. So here is one block of my drum loop. It is multiple blocks long. A lot of the times I'll take a 4-bar loop, copy paste, make it 8, and then modify it a little bit. For the most part, that's what it is. I'm just gonna join these two clips together so you can get an idea of what the drum programming looks like. This line here with a ton of blocks is really my hi-hat, and the different colors just correlate with the dynamics of them. In other words, just the volume. I think this is just a crash, which it is. Then we got the kick, the snare, a pre-kick, and an open hat. So let's just play the drums in solo real quick. So pretty dry, but intentionally. There was a lot of stuff going on with the sample, especially when I started kind of, widening the sound, and there's a little bit of delay on the sample as well. So nice dry drum kit, a little snappy, and the hi-hats had a little bit of bounce to it. Pretty straightforward, and that's how I did the drums. Now, on the mixer for the drums, the only thing I did as a send, which I do like to do quite a bit, I like using the Scream 4 distortion unit in Reason. It's a great distortion unit. There's a ton of different settings, and this is just the easy fuzz setting. It might even be the default setting, but it just gives a really good sound on drums, especially the drum bus. So let's go over the insert chain on my drum bus. The very first thing that I put on most times, it's on my, I'm pretty sure it's still in my template. This one's a little bit older, but I use a VU meter, and I basically just want to make sure that the kick is hitting right around 0 on the VU meter. So for those who might not know, a VU meter was a part of analog consoles and analog equipment to make sure that you were getting the most out of your hardware. You didn't want to come in too hot because obviously it would distort it, potentially distort it in a bad way. And if you weren't coming in hot enough, meaning loud enough, there would be a lot of noise from the machines or potentially something else in the room that is not going to be pleasant, so to speak. So you want to make sure that it was hitting it at the perfect level so it would potentially get the warmth and the character of the old consoles in this case, but without it going too far. So I try to do that just because I think it's a good starting point, especially for hip hop, because as long as my kick is hitting pretty much at 0, sometimes a little bit higher, I can then kind of level all my other drums around that for the most part. It gives me a really good starting point just to make sure I'm not super out of whack from the beginning. Next up is a virtual mix rack. I have a virtual channel on this. I do have a saturation unit that is bypassed, so I didn't end up using that on this. And I really love using the FG401. It's a VCA compressor. A lot of controls. Again, I just really like the way it sounds on drums. I think this one I was feeding the drums in and they weren't super loud, so I did a lot of makeup going in. I think it just took a little bit off the top. Yeah, so I'm only doing, like, the gain reduction is just about over 3 dB, maybe 4. Sometimes it's hitting a little bit harder on the snare. I mix it about halfway, original signal, compressed signal, gives it a little bit of punch, but it's not too thin. Best of both worlds. Next up, I use Knock by Decap, a very dope drum bus plugin. Basically, from left to right, you just have a transient shaper that's really just one way. You're just, if you want some punch, you just kind of raise that. Transient shapers are a really good thing to be using if you're mixing drums. This one is just an attack up. It has has a really dope saturation feature here too. There's 3 different settings. I have it about halfway up. I didn't use it in this one, but this has an EQ feature. It's essentially just a boost, and there's a vintage and a clean feature. The vintage setting with this is really dope. It gives it a nice little crunch to it, especially if your drums are very dry and it just needs a little something. Hit this, sounds really good. The clipper on this is excellent also. This has a standalone plugin as well, Decap made, that's just the clipper. I like to use this a lot. I'm a big fan of the soft clipping aspect of this. So those are the drums. I mean, the individual sounds, this is just what I did on the kick drum. Might seem like a lot, but every little bit can, kind of bring you a long way. And this one had just some frequencies up top, a little boxiness, a little bit too much on the 2K, a little bit on the almost 5K. So this is the snare track. Again, this one just had a lot of 4K, and I'm always dialing back the 2 to 6K area on a lot of stuff just because, our ears as humans, they're really sensitive to that area. This is just the pre-kick that gives it the swing, not too much going on there. And on the hi-hat, I just did a high-pass filter up to about 1K with a 12 dB per octave roll-off. So now let's go on to the samples. Let's go over the audio chops on this one. I'm just going to combine the first 4 bars of chops just to show you what it looks like in the sequencer. Let's solo the sample and let's just play it.
Waterslide world, waterslide world, wild event. Waterslide world, I'm really crazy about your wild slide. Waterslide world, waterslide world, wild event. Waterslide world, fun event. I'm on a baby going waterslide world.
So there's a few chops where I have a note and then the same note a little bit after that, a little bit lower as an effect, as if I'm delaying it using a delay plugin. But sometimes it's much easier just to take the note itself and do a delay within the chop. Really depends on what you're doing. Most times if you are using delays, it can be much easier to use a send and then automate the mute on and off or the volume on and off for the send. But for a quick delay here and there, it can be really helpful to just duplicate the sample chop and then lower the volume. Just all depends on what you're doing. So let's go over the inserts for the sample. First up is the F6 dynamic EQ from Waves, quite possibly my favorite plugin that has ever been made. I know that's a strong statement, but I use this on everything. I rolled off pretty much everything under 100. I wanted to get rid of a little bit of the boxiness here at about 150 to 200. There was also a lot of air coming on the top of the samples, so I did a low pass filter to about 4 dB. That was the first EQ I put on, and I'm almost always layering EQs. I'll do one thing with one EQ, then I'll put another EQ on, so I'm not doing too much with one EQ. I try to do a couple at a time. On the second EQ, I'm doing a roll off on the top and the low end, and I'm giving a boost, a wide Q in the middle at around 700 hertz, 665 hertz. Something to note too when it comes to melodies, always a good idea to make sure that the mid-range of the melody is nice and full. Instruments that are giving you the melody, it very much helps when the mid-range is there because the kick and the snare and the bass are usually taken up, 250 and below, and then the hi-hats, voices from vocals and other instruments, strings, they tend to take up a little bit more of, 1 to 2K and up. And the instruments that are really holding the main melody of a song, not always, but a lot of the times, they're going to be in the middle of the frequency range. So if it's lacking that, always a good idea to give it a nice little boost just to make sure you can hear it. And it sounded lovely. Next up is Fresh Air from Slate Digital. Love Slate Digital. And for this one, I just boosted this mid knob 6%. Seems like nothing, but when you A and B at certain times, Fresh Air does a lot under the hood. It's a sort of compressor, EQ, and saturator, so to speak, all in one. And you just turn the knob and it gives it a nice bright sound without really sounding too distorted or anything like that. I didn't use the high air on this one. The high air is really high frequencies. And then I used an imager on the sample here because it was really tightly mono, especially on the higher frequencies. So way up, basically 4K and up, I cranked the stereo image. So about 400 hertz to 4K, boosted it up a little bit, gave it a nice little image on the sample. Last up is the bass. There was a lot of quick, punchy stab notes on this, and it sounded really cool. It might not be too easy to hear on your phone, but if you have headphones, throw them on. Pretty funky, has some of that high punch to it, and we'll go over the mix in just a second, but that's the bass line. It does do a little bit more as the beat goes on, but for now, that was it. Okay, for the bass, I love using the FG 116 FET compressor. It is Slate's recreation of the 1176. I've just found that it sounds really good on bass. I don't know why, and on most tracks, I'm throwing it through this right off the rip just to give it a nice squash. Full mix knob on this one too. I don't tend to pull that back. I really like having a squashed compressor sound, but I'm also not cranking the input. So although it is getting compressed, it's not too much because I'm really controlling it by the input and the output. Next up is the F6. I have a high pass on the really low frequencies, and then I have a low pass going down to almost 300 hertz. Really just keeping the meat of the bass on this one without any high frequencies. Track Spacer is an amazing plugin that I use for sidechaining. So I sidechain my kick drum and sometimes even the snare drum to the bass. Next up, I put on the Ozone 11 exciter. The reason I do this is a couple steps before you could see that I've rolled off a lot of the high end all the way down to about 300 hertz. But what I like doing is I like just giving myself that part of the bass sound to then add in harmonics later on with a device like this and just work off the meat of the bass, and it just kind of gives it a different sound. So this one at about 475 and up, I did some tape saturation at about a 50% mix, cranked it up about halfway on the meter, and it sounded really good. And last but not least, I did an ozone imager to kind of spread those top frequencies and still keep the bass coming right up the middle. A lot of the times you want your bass frequencies sitting pretty much in the middle of the mix. There are times where you can break that rule, but for this one, gave it a nice spread. Going into the mix bus, I have an Infinity EQ from Slate, just rolling off anything under about 25 hertz. You really don't want the rumble, even inaudible frequencies to be hitting really anything, but especially like compressors or anything on your master, because it could be adding things that you just don't want there that can affect other parts of the frequency range. Next up, virtual mix rack. I have a virtual mix bus on this for some saturation, taming a little bit of the 4K, and that's it for the virtual mix rack. Of course, I have the Mo TT from Slate on this, just gives it such a nice glue and compression. I have it about 53, about 50%. This is pretty much the hip hop setting with a few tweaks. And then after that, I just got it going into ozone. And that does it for this beat breakdown. Episode number 2, Waterslide, which is out now on all streaming platforms. You can catch it on my YouTube channel. Let's just play it from the beginning. And I hope you like this video. If you do, please consider liking and subscribing. There will be plenty more to come. Have a good rest of the week. Peace out.
Waterslide world, one, you bet. Waterslide world.